Welcome to Folkways, the folklore of Britain and Ireland podcast. So today it is my pleasure to welcome Fiona Aedgar to the show. Fiona is a highly regarded astrologer, but there's another part of her work that has really caught people's imagination recently, and that is her work with the ancestors. So I just want to welcome Fiona to the show and pretty much just get straight into it. Because to some people this could feel a bit spooky. Who are we talking about when we say the ancestors? What do we mean?
Yeah, I think to a lot of modern people it does seem a bit spooky, especially if you come from like one of the Abrahamic backgrounds. Um, but this is something that all of our ancestors did, before the age of Christianity, and it was pretty much universal, amongst all of the tribes on the planet, is that they did something to honor the ancestors and they would venerate them. Um, we should do that. Well, first of all, because they're our ancestors, they gave us life, but they live on in us. We're like a composite of them. So when you honor your ancestors, you're also honoring a part of yourself. Samhain, that Halloween is based on. The Celtic, festival of Samhain was the time when in Irish and Scottish people, they would have laid a table of food and drink, just for one night, to honor them, and said the ancestors can then bless us and, protect us and all of those things. I don't think it's spooky when you see them as parts of yourself and they gave us life.
I love that. I love the focus on that they are part of ourselves. And something I'm always curious about with your work, Fiona, is like, what's your story? What's your personal story with how you got here? Because you just seem like someone who's got it all figured out. I'd love to know your journey to these practices.
Thanks. I mean, I'm 44 now, and I suppose I feel like I have got it together a bit compared to what I used to be like. But like a lot of people, I kind of did the whole new age craziness, a mishmash of like bizarre practices and, workshops and things like that, which didn't really do anything for me, to be honest. It kind of acted as a doorway to what I'm on now, which seems more authentic. But yeah, the whole new age kind of stuff. Okay, well, I did that, and then I think it was about 2015, I discovered Thomas Sheridan, and Thomas and I are pretty good friends now. He's a great guy, and I just watched him, and he was talking about all of this, like, authentic Irish path, and he talked about the ancestral stuff and paganism. And I guess I would have been a pagan before that, definitely, but it wasn't really grounded into anything ancestral. It was, work with this one and do that with that one. And he kind of solidified it for me and made it into something more authentic. So I have quite a lot of Anglo-Saxon blood. I've got some Danish. I've got Scottish. But for me, it was the Nordic gods that really stood out to me. And I just took it from there, really. And now, for me personally, now there's nothing else for me at all, because it's so powerful and it takes you through a journey, and it kind of you go through the forge, and you kind of end up as the best version of yourself that you could be. So that's just what I've done. I had a lot of adventures along the way.
But just in terms of this personal side, do you have any personal stories, either you or someone else, about what can happen when you start working with the ancestors?
Well, when I talk about the ancestors, I'm very much talking about the whole thing. Uh, for me, the ancestral path is one of the gods, and my ancestors. It's not they're not really separated in that way. But in particular, Odin, I've got I guess not a close relationship, but for me, Odin feels very close, and he was the first of the Nordic gods that I would honor, and he took me through the fire. Because, like my friend Tina Kemp always says, Odin is not for everyone. He wasn't honored by everyone. That's something that people misunderstand in the modern age, is that Odin was for kind of specific people. Um, and a lot of the pantheons were like that. There were gods that were only honored by, the warrior class, but of course that we don't want to think about that now because everyone wants to be everything. But Odin definitely exposed a lot of my weaknesses as a human. I think, I'm smiling and kind of laughing because other people that I know that have started to honor Odin, the same thing happens. I guess before all of this, I didn't have the best track record with relationships. I was a bit gullible. I was a bit silly. And Odin kind of puts you through experiences where that's all stripped away from you. Now he turns you into a better version of yourself, and your strengths and your gifts and that kind of thing are all more accessible to you. But it's definitely hard. It is hard. He's done that to me twice, actually. But it's all it's all for the good. Like I always say, spiritual awakening is not like doing yoga on a hill. A 20-year-old doing yoga on a hill and everything's beautiful and angelic and rainbows. Like spiritual awakening is hard. It's blood, sweat, and tears. And suffering is what leads to spiritual awakening, even though we don't like to think of it that way.
Yeah. So, from a folk magic perspective, I'd really love to know more about how people can incorporate this into their everyday. So, not something that's sanctioned by the church or an intermediary.
For the ancestors specifically, you should only do that like once a year because the ancestors are in, the people that we knew are in a different realm. And I think within New Age practices, they think that they can talk to call up Granny every day for a chat, and it's not actually advised to do that. And if you look at indigenous populations, for example, the Native Americans, the Aboriginal people, they would never do that because they think it pulls them out of their realm and they can't, cross over properly. So I would do that once a year, like I said, on Samhain. I say Samhain, which is Irish, but I was raised in Ireland, so that's what I continue to call it. Lay a table for them, light a fire, tell stories about them, talk to them, but it's only for that night. It's not for the rest of the year. With the gods, though, I do something probably every day. Light some incense for them. Maybe once a month, I might do a bigger ritual. But do what you feel is right for yourself. Like you say, it's not the church. You don't have to go every Sunday or they're going to strike you down. Paganism is not like that. But that's what I do. That's what I do.
So, regarding the gods, you're talking about more of a daily practice. Can you give us some idea of what you do?
Um, I just light some incense for them. I'm quite connected with the goddess Freya, and she's kind of like a beacon of light in this dark world, and she's known for when you start to honor her. She kind of takes away like those dark feelings that we get from living in this kind of dark world. She helps with love. She is the goddess of Seidr, the Nordic folk magic. And I just simply would just acknowledge, and say hello and give her some incense. Not every day, but a lot of the time I will do that. So again, it's about what do you personally feel comfortable with. Don't promise
Yeah.
the gods anything that you're not going to deliver. Don't say,
Someone,
okay.
someone I really like is Aidan Wachter, and he talks a lot about having a really simple, stripped back day-to-day practice. So he'll give a tea light and some water and some salt. Uh, so rather than it being this huge thing that can feel stressful to keep up, he just keeps it very, very simple, something that you can incorporate into your everyday. But I also wanted to talk to you, Fiona, about your Nordic practice because you are so outspoken about this. So, what is Nordic paganism to someone who's never heard about it?
It's honoring the Nordic gods. It's using symbols that were specific to that belief system. Um, you can also learn some Seidr, the folk magic. I think everyone these days though does know who they are because Odin is absolutely everywhere now. Especially about 10 years ago, and you had like Vikings on the TV, and then they start the Marvel stuff, but they're not true depictions of the characters of the gods. Um, a really good thing to do would be to read the Scandinavian sagas. They're really interesting and cool to read, and the characters of the gods kind of shines through in a way that modern movies and stuff they fail to capture that, I think.
What is a misconception that you would love to correct?
That Odin is a big cuddly father god. Odin was for elite warriors. That's the kind of god that he is. He's not a cuddly father that's going to indulge all of your weaknesses and degeneracy. Like I said, he exposes those weaknesses and helps you through it, but he's not like cuddly and soft.
What can potentially happen when you start working with Odin with this in mind?
You can be stripped away to your core self, which is hard. It's hard for some people and probably not advisable for some people because you will, if you're in a relationship, for example, that is really bad for you, and it's based on weaknesses or something that's making you weak. Well, that's probably going to go down in flames. Yeah, yeah. You see the modern kind of depictions of Odin are just, not it's not that like I know him inside out, he's a god. I only know my own experience. But if you read the Eddas or if you read the sagas, you'll find a kind of different character in there. So don't approach Odin unless you're prepared for that to happen. That's a true spiritual awakening. It's not aliens and rainbows and things. It's real and it will strip you away and you will become a much stronger person and a much better person, I think.
How should you approach Odin?
With an offering, the offerings are important. It's like the lesson of Gabo, the rune. It's a gift for a gift. When you want something, you give something. Also, in a kind of metaphysical way, if you're giving something to that realm, you will receive something from their realm. So you could give an offering of incense, of food, of mead. Mead. I've given whiskey or brandy before, but you do what you think is right and what they would like, something homemade, a homemade cake, endless possibilities. Or you can give an offering of um, giving something, maybe giving something up about yourself. Odin sacrificed himself to himself. So what can you do? Like I should give up smoking, but I haven't got there yet. But what can you offer that will ultimately improve your life?
This made me think as you were talking of prayer versus sacrifice. So we really struggle, I think, with this idea. Sacrifice to us is this terrible thing. I've got pictures from primary school of the Aztecs, of someone atop a pyramid, with another person's heart, offering it to the sun. Primary school. And so I wonder, in terms of sacrifice, if we really struggle to get into this idea because of some of these connotations, it has to be dark, and civilization's about to collapse. How do we get around this in terms of bringing this back in a positive, reciprocal way? For example, if your car breaks down and your friend gives you a lift, you're not going to get down on your knees and thank them. You're probably going to get them something like a bottle of wine, maybe take them out for dinner. What do you think?
Yeah, well, thankfully we're not going to do that. We're not going to offer another human being or someone's heart. But just think of it as if you go to visit one of your relatives, that you haven't seen for ages, you might bring a little gift, some flowers or something nice for them to eat. It's kind of the same thing. Um, yeah, that's just the way that I see it. So you don't have to sacrifice your firstborn son or anything like that. You can just give a little nice gift to say that you appreciate them. But again, this is something that's weird to us, but it wasn't weird to 99% of our ancestors. People would give offerings to rivers as well, to the land, to trees, to nature spirits. It wasn't just the gods. There's always been that give and take until recently, and now it just seems like it's take.
This reminds me of that lake in Switzerland. I think it was Switzerland, where a huge amount of beautiful warfare items were found, such as armor, shields, swords, and they were given, it is suggested, specifically to the lake. Fiona, if someone had never heard of the old gods, how would you introduce them?
Well, I'm sure they've heard of the Christian God. I mean, everyone has. You can't really help it, especially at school and stuff. It's kind of shoved down your throat, I guess. But I would say, to put it in very simplistic terms, before that Christian God came along, there were a lot of other gods believed by, different cultures all over the world. And they're still here. They haven't gone away. Uh, what are they exactly? Well, they're not in our realm, but you could see them as a kind of collective spirit of the folk or the tribe that you know, uh, I don't know how else to put it, to be honest.
So, is there anything else on a day-to-day level that you would encourage people to do if they're beginning to look into these topics for the first time?
A good thing would be to maybe look at the runes and maybe start to study those. It looks quite daunting because it's not like the tarot where you have, pictures to go by, or even astrology. It's a squiggle on a piece of wood or stone. But you'll be surprised by how much you learn and grow just by focusing on a rune a day. Like Sowillo, for example, is the rune of the sun, and it's all very positive, and it's about leadership and success and victory. So it's like a spiritual initiation to look at the runes or to study them. I guess that would be something. The problem with going by information alone on this path is that a lot of the information that we have has been passed through the lens of Christianity. It's in Ireland, for example, it was Christian monks that wrote everything down. So how do we know that they're telling it exactly how it was? We don't. Um, so you have to live the path yourself. You have to look at the runes. You have to give Freya an offering. Communicate with them, and that's how you live the path, I think, rather than reading books. I love to read books and I love the lore, but you can't go by that alone. You have to live it yourself. And that involves ritual, which a lot of people are scared of. But our ancestors did rituals all the time and pretty much every day they would give offerings and, to house spirits and this. So if you're careful about it and you practice it carefully, there's nothing to be afraid of.
And so I'd love to know, Fiona, what are some of the tangible things that people can expect to happen when they begin walking through these doors, when they begin talking to the ancestors and speaking to the old gods? What can they expect to happen in their day-to-day lives?
It does seem to create a sort of alchemy. There is an alchemical process that someone will start to go through. And I always think of it as an alignment. It doesn't have to be like Odin putting you through the fire. Odin is not for everyone. But Freya, for example, or Frey, Balder, if you start to honor them, you'll notice improvements in your life. The ancestral path realigns you and honestly does a lot to take away ancestral trauma. It does. And carrying around ancestral trauma is a lot like trying to walk through quicksand and you feel bogged down and you have plans for your life or ideas and everything falls away from you. And scientists will also say that it's a thing, ancestral trauma. We all have had recent ancestors that have gone through war. The Second and the First World War is like absolutely horrific. And science will say, well, yeah, we still carry that as a trauma in our own cells. From my experience, and I grew up kind of traumatized because my dad was in the police in Northern Ireland, in the 80s and 90s. Not a particularly nice time. And that definitely affected me as a human. I had a great lack of trust, and that affected my relationships, romantic relationships, my self-confidence, and just my ability to feel happy in life. And I'm not really knocking psychology, but it did nothing to help me. Talking about it helps to a certain extent, but it doesn't actually, for me anyway, fix everything. And, the ancestral path did that, undeniably so. So it did improve my relationships, um, and just the ability to be happy and to forge proper bonds with other people.
It's a slightly difficult topic, which maybe gets in a lot of people's way, and it did in mine, is how do we deal with ancestors who we don't necessarily want to connect with? Something really, really terrible happened in my family not that long ago, and there is nothing unique about this. Everybody listening to this will have their version of this. And so it can be an instinctive reaction to want to get as far away from that as possible and to think, oh, this is something for other people, a practice for other people to be involved with, not me. But the more you talk to people, you realize that, like I said, everyone has their version of a really terrible event that in their own family and potentially not far away that blocks this and makes them think that they don't want to get involved. So how do we work with the ancestors when there are certain ones that we don't want to connect with?
It's best to think of them in a collective way, I think. Like when I do my ancestor ritual, at Samhain, I say all of the surnames that I know of. I just say I just would like to give these offerings to all of my maternal ancestors and my paternal ancestors and say the names that you want to say. My sister passed away a couple of years ago and I say her name. If there's someone that caused a lot of harm, then don't say it, but do address that side of the family as a whole. Because it was probably some kind of ancestral stuff that made them who they are. So we don't want to ignore that either. But that's what a lot of people say that to me. I like they will talk about an ancestor that was abusive or did something terrible, and it's really hard for them to get past that, but just address them kind of collectively.
I would love to know if there are any stories from the Norse sagas or mythology that particularly inspire or speak to you.
Honestly, Ragnarok, because I think that we're in it now. Ragnarok is a time when man has become very weak and degenerate, and people don't have morals anymore. And there's said to be, a serpent that has kind of engulfed the earth. And a wolf has, swallowed the sun, and it's very dark. And the wrong people are in leadership, fake leaders that are only out for their own gain. So you could see it as something that happened in the past, but it's also happening now as well. It's similar to the Kali Yuga. It's pretty much the same thing. The Kali Yuga is the Vedic version, but they're telling the same story. It happened in the past. It's happening now. It's like an eternal circle of this kind of archetypal story that we seem to be kind of whirling around in. And I think that's just the way that the world works. Right now we're in winter. Everything's dead outside, but we know that in a couple of months we're going to have a lot of life again. So this Ragnarok inspires me because it's about destruction, and I think the world is really dark at the moment. And you just look at stuff that's going on and you think, this is awful. This is absolutely terrible. But we know that, it's going to get stripped away, and it's going to restart again. Maybe some people find that dark. I actually find it comforting because I think some of the things that are happening now, you just think, well, this is bloody awful. I never wanted to see any of this stuff happening. But it's a winter, it's a darkness that humanity goes through periodically. And then, we're reborn again.
I talk about that a lot on the show in terms of the seasons and surviving winter because of spring will bring renewal. And I guess what you're talking about is the spiritual version of that. This did lead me on to thinking this time of year can be really depressing. Are there any sagas or anything else you can recommend that would give people inspiration?
I think it's a great time of year for introspection, and it's also a good time to get more sleep, which I think is a spiritual tool. Because I don't know about you, but I get a lot of messages in my dreams and things like that. Now, a lot of people can't do that. I'm self-employed, so I can take a wee nap in the afternoon if I want. And I find that I get a lot of imagery and, stuff in my dreams. I write it down, like, oh. But yeah, it is a dark time of year. A lot of people get depressed. I do think that the spirit world is closer this time of year. It just kind of feels that way. But if you're not making the most of it and enjoying the seasons, you are going to be depressed. But yeah, introspection, more spiritual work, um, and just the appreciation that in a couple of months, it is going to be spring again. The sun's coming back. We've passed the winter solstice. There's a little bit of extra daylight every day, until the summer solstice. So just try and feel joy at being alive. We're not here for a very long time. None of us know how long we're going to be actually here for. Just try and appreciate everything that life has to offer, even the dark times.
I love that. Fiona, where can people find you?
My website is fionaedgar.com. I'm also on Substack, YouTube and Telegram. I'm kind of everywhere. So just shoot me a message or visit my website to read articles. I'm very active on Substack these days. It's a great site. So check me out if you want.